The story does not begin in a laboratory or a library of ancient texts. It begins with a quiet discomfort, an unease that something essential is missing from the way we explain life. For more than a century, modern science has described the human body as a biological machine governed by chemistry, genetics, and chance. DNA, we are told, is the master code, fixed, mechanical, and indifferent. Yet the deeper we look, the more cracks appear in that story. Identical genes do not produce identical lives. The same biology responds differently under different conditions. Something unseen seems to be at work. The first clue comes from a simple observation. Information shapes reality. In every other system we understand, computers, communications, ecosystems, information is not passive. It directs, adapts, and responds. Yet in biology, we long treated DNA as a static instruction manual, as if life were merely executing a predetermined script. That assumption worked well enough until evidence began to suggest otherwise. Cells respond to stress before damage occurs. The body prepares for threats that haven't happened yet. Healing accelerates or slows depending on internal states that cannot be reduced to chemistry alone. This raises a question that science rarely pauses to ask. What if DNA is not only a command structure, but a listening system? What if biology is not just built from matter, but guided by signals? As researchers explored gene expression more deeply, they discovered that genes activate and deactivate based on environmental input. Nutrition, toxins, and temperature play a role, but so do less tangible factors such as stress patterns, rhythms, and coherence within the body. Biology, it turns out, behaves less like a machine and more like a network. Networks respond. Networks adapt. Networks require communication. Here is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Long before microscopes, ancient civilizations described life in remarkably similar terms. They did not speak of molecules or cells, but of patterns, vibrations, and order emerging from chaos. Creation, in their view, was not assembled piece by piece. It was organized through relationship. While modern science dismissed these ideas as symbolic or poetic, the language begins to look less metaphorical when viewed through the lens of information theory. The real tension emerges when we realize that modern tools were never designed to detect meaning or intention-only mechanism. By narrowing our focus to what can be measured easily, we may have overlooked what matters most. The question was never whether DNA exists or how it replicates. The forgotten question is deeper and more unsettling. What is DNA responding to? This chapter does not propose answers. It establishes the problem. If life were purely mechanical, then randomness should dominate, yet order persists. If DNA were entirely self-contained, external signals would be irrelevant. Yet biology reacts as though it is in conversation with its environment. Something is influencing the system from beyond the code itself. And once that realization takes hold, a new path opens, one that leads backward into ancient knowledge and forward into discoveries we are only beginning to understand. The journey begins not with certainty, but with the courage to ask the question science forgot to ask. Long before the rise of laboratories, equations, and instruments, ancient civilizations sought to understand life by observing patterns rather than dissecting parts. They watched the cycles of the heavens, the rhythms of the seasons, and the recurring structures in nature. And from these observations emerged a common insight. Life was governed by order, not randomness. Across cultures separated by geography and time, creation was described not as an accident, but as an organized process brought forth through sound, symbol, and relationship. To the modern mind, these descriptions appear mythological. Yet when examined carefully, they reveal a sophisticated attempt to describe information long before the word itself existed. In ancient traditions, language was never merely a tool for communication. It was considered a creative force. Letters were not symbols, they were building blocks. Numbers were not quantities, they were qualities. Together, they formed a system through which reality itself was believed to emerge. From the Vedic traditions of India to the philosophical systems of the Mediterranean and the mystical schools of the Middle East, creation was consistently portrayed as something spoken, ordered, or encoded into form. This was not poetry for its own sake. It was a way of describing how structure arises from the unseen. What makes this perspective remarkable is not its symbolism, but its consistency. Independent cultures arrived at similar conclusions without shared language or contact. Life, they agreed, unfolds according to patterns that exist prior to matter. Modern science would later echo this idea through mathematics and physics, discovering that the universe operates on invisible frameworks of order fields, waves, and probabilities that shape what eventually becomes physical. When viewed through this lens, ancient descriptions begin to resemble early models of informational reality. These cultures may not have known about DNA, but they understood that something intangible governed the tangible. They recognized that form follows pattern and pattern follows principle. What they lacked in instruments, they compensated for with observation and insight. The tragedy is not that modern science rejected these ideas, but that it stopped listening to them altogether. In separating myth from mechanism, we may have discarded the very language that could help us understand how life organizes itself. This chapter marks a turning point in the journey where ancient wisdom is no longer treated as superstition, but as a different way of describing the same reality. A reality we are only now beginning to rediscover, not through belief, but through evidence. For much of modern history, biology has been described as a hierarchy of control. DNA sits at the top, issuing instructions that cells dutifully follow. This model is clean, predictable, and reassuring. Yet, as scientific tools became more precise, this certainty began to unravel. Researchers noticed that genes do not act alone, nor do they operate continuously. They switch on and off, they respond, and most importantly, they wait for signals before expressing themselves. Biology, it turns out, is not a one-way command system, it is a conversation. The discovery of gene regulation fundamentally changed how life is understood. Genes do not determine outcomes in isolation, they depend on context. The same genetic sequence can produce dramatically different results depending on the environment in which it exists. Temperature, nutrition, chemical exposure, and stress all influence which genes are expressed and which remain silent. This adaptability is not accidental. It suggests that DNA is designed not just to store information, but to interpret it. What is striking is how sensitive this system is. Cells respond to changes before structural damage occurs. The body prepares for threat in advance of injury. Healing accelerates in supportive conditions and slows under chronic stress. These responses reveal an underlying intelligence within biological systems, one that anticipates rather than reacts. Life behaves less like a machine and more like a responsive network, continuously adjusting to incoming information. This insight challenges a long-held assumption that biology is driven solely by chemistry. While chemical reactions are essential, they are not sufficient to explain the speed and coordination of biological responses. Signals travel faster than molecules alone can account for. Information appears to be transmitted through patterns and timing, not just substances. Biology listens before it acts. Here, the boundary between ancient insight and modern discovery begins to blur. Ancient cultures spoke of harmony, balance, and alignment as essential to health and vitality. They understood that disruption in relationship within the body or between the individual and the environment led to disorder. Today, science describes the same phenomenon using different language: dysregulation, stress response, loss of coherence. This chapter marks a quiet but profound shift. If DNA listens, then humans are not passive victims of their biology. We participate in it. The signals we generate through our environment, behaviors, and internal states shape how our biology expresses itself. The implications are vast, suggesting that life is not governed by rigid commands, but guided by continuous communication, one in which we are both sender and receiver. As science pushed beyond the boundaries of chemistry and mechanics, it began to uncover a deeper layer of reality, one that does not reside in solid matter, but in fields. Every atom, every cell, and every organ generates measurable electrical and magnetic activity. These fields do not stop at the surface of the body. They extend outward, interacting with the environment and with one another. What was once dismissed as theoretical has become observable, measurable, and impossible to ignore. Life does not exist in isolation. It exists within a sea of influence. Among the most compelling discoveries is the role of the human heart. Far more than a biological pump, the heart generates the strongest electromagnetic field produced by the body. This field changes with emotional and physiological states, becoming ordered during moments of calm and coherence, and chaotic during stress or fear. The body responds accordingly. Systems synchronize, communication improves, and energy is conserved when coherence is present. When it is lost, biological efficiency declines. The field, it appears, carries information. This realization reframes how influence works. Information does not need to travel through physical contact alone. Fields transmit patterns instantly, shaping how systems organize themselves. In physics, this principle is well understood. In biology, it is only beginning to be explored. Cells, tissues, and organs respond not only to chemical signals, but to the quality of the surrounding field. Order encourages order. Disorder amplifies disorder. Ancient traditions described this phenomenon long before it could be measured. They spoke of life force, breath, and vital energy not as superstition, but as observable experience. Health was associated with flow and balance, illness with stagnation or disruption. What modern science now identifies as coherence within biological fields mirrors these ancient descriptions with striking precision. Different languages, same observation. This chapter reveals a subtle but transformative insight. Influence does not require force, it requires alignment. When systems are coherent, they communicate effortlessly. When they are not, resistance appears. If human biology operates within and responds to fields, then the quality of those fields matters deeply. We are not only shaped by what we consume or inherit, but by the invisible patterns we generate and share. The field that connects everything may be the missing link between ancient wisdom and modern science, and a reminder that life is far more interconnected than we were ever taught to believe. When modern science first mapped the structure of DNA, it was celebrated as the ultimate instruction manual for life, a fixed sequence of chemical letters determining everything from eye color to susceptibility to disease. Yet over time, this view proved incomplete. The genome did not behave like a rigid blueprint. Instead, it revealed itself as a dynamic archive, capable of responding, adapting, and remembering. DNA was not simply a code to be executed. It was a record of experience. Researchers began to notice that certain biological responses could persist across generations without changes to the genetic sequence itself. Traits shaped by environment, stress, or nourishment appeared in descendants who had never directly encountered those conditions. This phenomenon challenged the assumption that inheritance was purely genetic. Biology was carrying forward more than DNA, it was carrying memory. The past somehow was speaking through the present. At the same time, advances in information science demonstrated something equally astonishing. DNA could store vast amounts of data reliably over long periods of time. Scientists successfully encoded messages into DNA strands and recovered them intact after multiple replications. This confirmed that DNA is not only a biological structure, but one of the most efficient information storage systems known. Nature had already solved the problem modern technology was just beginning to understand. Ancient cultures seemed to intuit this long before the language of genetics existed. Lineage, ancestry, and inherited responsibility were central to their worldview. They believed that the experiences of one generation shaped the destiny of the next, not only culturally, but biologically and spiritually. What science now calls inherited expression, they described as ancestral memory. Different explanations, same observation. This chapter reframes the genome as a living library. DNA does not merely store instructions for building the body, it preserves echoes of how life has been lived. Every adaptation, every survival leaves an imprint not always in sequence, but in expression. If this is true, then human biology is not just a product of chance mutations, but a continuous story written across time. Understanding DNA as memory invites a profound responsibility. The choices we make today may become the biological inheritance of tomorrow. The journey that began with a simple question now arrives at a quiet but powerful realization. Human biology is not a closed system, it is participatory. The evidence gathered from modern science and ancient insight points to the same conclusion: life responds to relationship. Genes respond to environment, cells respond to fields, and the body responds to signals that extend far beyond chemistry alone. Within this responsive design lies an extraordinary truth. We are not passive observers of our biology, but active contributors to it. For centuries, humanity has struggled with the idea of destiny. Are we bound by our genes, our past, or forces beyond our control? The emerging picture suggests something far more nuanced. Biology provides potential, not prophecy. DNA offers possibilities, not fixed outcomes. The determining factor is not the code itself, but the conditions under which it is expressed. In this space between potential and expression, choice becomes the most powerful influence of all. Ancient traditions placed great emphasis on responsibility, not as moral burden, but as awareness. To live in alignment was to live in harmony with the forces that sustain life. Modern science echoes this insight through a different lens, revealing that coherence, balance, and stability within biological systems support health and resilience. Disorder and chronic stress disrupt communication and diminish expression. The wisdom was never about belief, it was about relationship. This understanding reframes human potential. Growth is not imposed from the outside, nor is it locked inside the genome. It emerges through interaction. Every experience, environment, and internal state sends a signal. Over time, these signals shape not only how we live, but how we pass life forward. Evolution, in this sense, is no longer something that merely happens to us, it is something we participate in. The final message is neither mystical nor mechanistic. It is practical and profound. If biology listens, then awareness matters. If life responds, then intention paired with action carries weight. The ancient civilizations may not have known the language of genes, but they understood the responsibility of being human. Today, science is rediscovering that truth not as philosophy, but as evidence. The choice hidden in our biology is this: to live unconsciously within the system, or to participate consciously in the unfolding of life itself.